Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Our panelists are already lined up here in the flesh. So let's convene today's summit. And before we begin, allow me to introduce our distinguished guests for today from Kyiv. Joining us, journalist and analyst at Internews, Maxim Panchenko. And here in our studios, Nicole Yochin, journalist. Thank you very much for joining us. And our very own I-24 News senior international affairs correspondent and analyst, Owen Alterman, the hero you didn't even know you needed. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for your time today. And our main topic, in the aftermath of those gruesome videos of Russian soldiers' brutality, where will the Russia-Ukraine war be heading? Let's take a closer look.
414 days into the Russia-Ukraine war, and if alleged leaked US documents are accurate, this is not even close to the final day. Documents, purported to be from US intelligence agencies, says that the battle for the Donbass in Ukraine's eastern region is heading towards a stalemate. The leaks, which are yet to be fully verified, also state that around 350,000 soldiers from both sides have been killed or injured since the invasion started in February 2022. One of these deaths has caused a stir in recent days, as online footage circulated of a Ukrainian soldier in Bakhmut being beheaded, drawing ire from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and even receiving criticism from the Kremlin. But as the casualty count rises on the Russian side too, new conscriptions given online are forcing even the most reluctant Russians to fight and serve. But will an army of unmotivated, untrained soldiers be able to successfully battle an army with heavy Western backing? With the body count rising, will the war be won on the battlefield or the negotiating table? How will the Russia-Ukraine stalemate end?
So let's get to it. How will the Russia-Ukraine stalemate end? As always, gentlemen, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick it up from there. So Maxim Panchenko, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Hello, thank you for having me. So first of all, I'd say that optics are important, because I would not call this a stalemate just yet. There are certain parties to the war, particularly Russia, that are interested in presenting it as a stalemate, as to discourage Ukraine and the West from further fight. But in fact, we should not underestimate the fact that Ukraine has been preparing a counteroffensive, and we basically are on its doorstep. So it is not, in fact, a stalemate. It's just a pause before we inflict what we hope to be one of the coup d'etats.
Nicole Yochin, your thoughts?
I think that this war should be ended in 1 year, maybe more, because that's what from the beginning the Western countries said, that they wanted, or they think this war will be a few years, and that's how it looks like, because after a few years all the countries will understand that there is no way for them to continue this war, because they don't have enough money, ammunition. It's bad for the economy, it's bad for everybody. But until somebody is winning from this war, it will continue, from my perspective.
Attrition, so to speak. Last but definitely not least, Owen Alterman?
Yeah, the West isn't going to fund a stalemate. That's the bottom line. I do think the Ukrainians get another chance for a counteroffensive to try to win the war, but the U.S. over the long term is not going to fund a stalemate, let alone the Europeans. We know that Vladimir Putin has lost the war. There's literally nothing he can do to change that. The question is whether the Ukrainians will win or fight this to a draw.
And on that note, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact, and let's begin our conversation from that point. Exactly, Owen, you're talking about the West not financing a stalemate, but the West, let me put it that way, the West is saying that it is supporting and backing Ukraine until the end, but the definition of what is this end might be different. Ukrainian officials still talking in terminology of that includes Crimea. This is not necessarily the end, so to speak, of the West, Owen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, of course, everyone would expect the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian public to say that, but at the end of the day, if the U.S. and the West are providing essential funding and essential supplies, they're going to have a say in when this ends, and they're going to at some point tell Volodymyr Zelensky that it needs to end. We're not at that point yet. He does get another chance to try to actually deliver a final blow to the Russians, and of course, no one more than Joe Biden would like to see him succeed, but if it doesn't happen, I do think at some point that the U.S. is going to basically tell Zelensky, listen, you need to negotiate. Here are the parameters that we think need to happen. A negotiation internally between the Ukrainians and the West, and then ultimately the negotiation with the Russians.
So, Maxim Panchenko, is it to make it or break it time for Zelensky, as Owen is suggesting?
A very useful thing here in this context would be to understand that this war, even in the eyes of the West, is not just about Ukraine. It's not about Biden telling Zelensky to do whatever. Look at the concept of foreign policy that Russia adopted, I think, a week back or 2 weeks back. It presents Russia's ambitions as, it says, I think, a Eurasian Pacific country seeking to undermine the existing world order. So one should not think that the West and the US support of Ukraine is about supporting just Ukraine, doing something regionally, locally. It's about the interests of the US, because if Russia is led to achieve its goals in Ukraine, that will mean that Russia will have a chance to promote its vision for, as it calls, a multipolar world. And of course, Russia wants to be one of those poles. And in that world, should it come to an existence, the U.S. interests would be infringed on, because the international system, the international law, the international institutions, the power that the U.S. and the West wage will be undermined, and the West does not want that. So it's not only about Ukraine; it's something local.
I agree with that. I mean, just two very quick points, and we'll head off. Number one, the Russians and Vladimir Putin have not and will not achieve their goals in Ukraine. They're not going to achieve those goals. He is going to lose the war one way or another. So there's that. And number two, I agree with what you're saying. And if that's true, this is a worldwide kind of struggle between the United States and Russia that, again, goes far beyond Ukraine. And there are going to be many, many other arenas where the United States is going to need to compete with Russia. And it may be that in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 12 months' time, the U.S. decides to focus on some of those other arenas, maybe at the expense, again, of not wanting to fund a stalemate, if that's where we're headed.
So is it not the Ukraine war, but rather the Russia war?
I believe it's now it's a political will and political reasons that are now in the middle of this war, because we have presidential elections in the United States, in Russia, also maybe in Ukraine after the war will end. So here now it's really dangerous, because now it's not what the people of those countries of the world wants, it's also what these politicians, what they can gain from this war to their political campaigns that now Putin will have, Biden will have, Zelensky maybe will have. So I think it's very dangerous, because these people sometimes they see themselves before their people, and that's why I'm not so optimistic about how it will end. But it will end just when those leaders will think it's good for them and not for their people, that's for sure.
Well, echoing the sentiments or the analysis that was brought up here, those Pentagon leaks, part of them suggesting that Kyiv's potential spring counteroffensive will not garner this sweeping victory, and more so, according to American analysis, that is, and more so suggesting that its air defensive are quite vulnerable. How is this affecting, if at all, the dynamics of the war? And as a side note question, who benefits from those leaks? That, again, accuracy, their accurateness is doubtful. Let's put it that way. Nick.
Yeah, I believe the people of the world, they're the one that benefiting from that, because they understand better what's going on behind the scenes and what's really happening, because the countries with their intelligent units, they know exactly what's going on. But for the people, it's good to see a bit of what is really going on, what are the considerations, what's going behind the scenes, and what is really happening, because the media in every country just showing the agenda at what the governments or they want to show to the people, and also the countries and the governments of all those countries. So you don't see what is not so good for Russia on Russian media, but the same on the West. You don't really see at the same angle, objective angle, what's going on. And I'm not speaking about Ukraine, because they're trying to save their country. So there it's also that the people can't believe everything they see on TV. Yeah.
So Maxim Panchenko, is it really revealing the truthful American sentiments vis-a-vis the Ukrainian ability or capability?
Well, I would disagree with the previous speaker that this is an objective picture because, first of all, there is too much of what they call fog of war. We do not really know much about these revelations, much enough to be unequivocal in its in the conclusions about it, where it came from, how accurate it is, etc., etc. I would, however, say that I think it benefits Russia because Russia is interested. Waiting for Ukraine's counteroffensive, which it so much fears, to present the world the picture according to which, look, this is a stalemate, let's talk, and Russia will still keep its territorial gains, for instance, in Ukraine, and will not be defeated. So Russia is interested. And also, it does not really change anything in the dynamic of the war, because more or less weapons, we do not really have a choice whether to fight or not. Because as the modern saying goes, if Russia stops the war, stops fighting, the end will be over. There is no more war. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there is going to be no more Ukraine. So we do not really have a choice but to keep fighting. And Ukraine essentially has so many times surprised the world. It has not fallen in 72 hours. It has managed to fight much of its territory back in Kherson and Kharkiv regions. So skepticism, I understand why there is room for skepticism, but let's not make it the cornerstone sentiment here. Ukraine knows how to impress.
Yeah, just add one more thing to go back to your question, Ellie, about who wins. I think the conventional feeling is that the Russians win because this will have exposed sources and methods of U.S. intelligence, and the Russians have to gain from that, obviously much more than the Ukrainians do. So I think that's the conventional thinking. How will it affect the war? No direct impact, but obviously an indirect impact over time. If the U.S. is less able to collect intelligence inside Russia and pass it on to Ukraine, obviously one would think that could hurt the Ukrainian effort dramatically.
And before we take a short break and get back to our discussion, let's dive into the Russian side of the divide, those online conscription forms that are beginning to be distributed. Russians not too eager to go serve, let's put it that way. Is a Russian revolt underway? And you know what, more so, can an unmotivated, untrained army win a war, Nick?
So, first of all, in Russia, of course, many people, they don't want to fight. Since the Second World War, they didn't fight in a real war, so they don't want it. Maybe they had some regional conflicts in Afghanistan and Chechnya and other places, but, many people didn't fight like in the Second World War, and that's why they don't want to go to the war. But they have enough of power, enough of soldiers to fight for sure, and they can continue. It's a huge country. They have many people, and they can recruit even from other countries, private organizations. So,
but if we learned anything from the Ukraine-Russia war, is that spirit matters, and in this respect, an unmotivated army, how far can it go?
I think that's the right way for it. I wouldn't put it as categorically that an unmotivated army can't win if there are enough of them. If simply the scales are so dramatically weighted in favor of one side in terms of its size and its resources, then sure, it can win. The question of whether it's true in this case, and obviously everything that we have seen over the course of the last 14 months would suggest that it's not true, that Russia can't win this war, that Russia has already lost this war. The only question is whether they'll be able to fight it to a draw. But to win the war, I think that ship has already sailed.
Okay, Owen Alterman, Nick Kolyokhin, and Maxim Panchenko, you're staying with us. We're taking a very short break, and now we get back to our summit. So much more to unpack. Is the sanction regime essentially a failure? A few minutes, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, journalist and analyst at Internews, Maxim Panchenko, live from Kyiv, and here in our Tel Aviv studios, Nick Kolyokhin, journalist. Thank you very much for joining us, and obviously, I-24 News senior international affairs correspondent and analyst Owen Alterman. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we get back to our conversation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky telling the world in the aftermath of, again, those horrific videos, you can no longer pretend you didn't know.
There is something no one in the world can ignore: how easily these beasts kill. This video of the execution of a Ukrainian prisoner of war, the world must see it. This is a video of Russia as it really is. What kind of creatures are they? There are no people like them. A son a brother, a husband, someone's child. This is a video of Russia trying to create a new normal, a habit of destroying life. This is not an accident. This is not an episode. This was the case earlier. This was the case in Bucha. Thousands of times, everyone must react. Every leader. Do not expect it to be forgotten. That time will pass. We are not going to forget anything, neither are we going to forgive the murderers.
So let's get to it. Can international pressure on Russia be a game changer here? Another quick fire round, gentlemen, and we'll pick it up from there. Nicole Jochen, please take the lead.
I think if it didn't help in the last 1 year and something, it will not happen. It will not matter at all, because what's matter it's other things, and this is the geopolitical games between the different countries, and now we have different areas of the world of influence: China, Russia, United States, Europe, and that's fight between them, and that's the only thing that will be matter in the future. Yeah.
Maxim Panchenko, your thoughts?
Well, I think that sanctions really do have a certain extent of effect, but at the same time, the very big problem with them, well, a couple of big problems, is that first, they are a reactionary method, so Russia has time to adjust, and second is that there is the problem of circumvention. The longer and the slower sanctions are being rolled out, the more time Russia has to find ways to circumvent them, to import things from technologies through third countries, etc. And with time, it resembles more a divorce rather than it is of the West with Russia, rather than it is sanctioning. I would comment like that.
Interesting terminology there. Owen Alterman.
Yeah, I agree. If it hasn't happened so far, it won't happen. The options for the West: fund a Ukrainian victory, if it's possible. And of course, I think that's everyone's first choice, or as an alternative, to be fighting Russia in the four corners of the earth, in different places where Russia has influence, to try to rein it in, and particularly to try to break apart China and Russia as much as possible.
Yeah, so it's not just, again, about Ukraine, perhaps not the Ukraine war, but the Russia war, as we've been discussing. And let's feel free to interact, gentlemen, from this point onwards. On the sidelines of this debate, we're seeing a report by Pulitzer Prize winner journalist Seymour Hersh claiming Zelensky and his administration are embezzled, essentially, according to his report, $400 million allocated from the West to purchase fuel, bringing the issue of corruption. I'm not even getting into the specifics, whether it's accurate or not, but bringing the issue of corruption back to the headlines. Maxim, will it have any impact on the popular support, if you will, of the Zelensky administration?
Well, first of all, I'm not acquainted with this material, so I cannot talk on the specifics. But logically, I think we're at war, and Zelensky's support has been very, very big and unflagging, I would say. And we know what we can and what we cannot afford in the times of war. Of course, we have public discussions on domestic issues, etc. But still, we know what we cannot afford and how we need to hold a line in front of the common enemy. So that's the first. Secondly, even if, I have a hard time believing these allegations. Again, I'm not acquainted with the first-hand material, but still, because this is very contrary to what Zelensky has been doing and what basically brought him to power, and what he has been implementing as anti-corruption policies. I'm not saying that there are no politicians and no officials in Ukraine that would not go into corruption, because people differ. But as far as we're concerned now, I do not see any grounds for calling this anything else as unverified.
Yeah, and not so long ago, we've also seen this domestic purge, so to speak, of suspected corrupted entities. So again, it's not the first time we've been discussing that. Nick, I do want to circle back to a point you've made earlier in our discussion, the White House factor. Let's put it that way. And another interesting report this week from Newsweek revealing black and white correspondence of an expected or anticipated wink from the Trump administration. The Kremlin was waiting, Putin was waiting to essentially seize Ukraine. A whole lot had happened since. Bottom line, is Putin just stalling time until the U.S. heads to the polls again?
I believe, it's a gamble also for Putin, but also for Biden, because nobody knows how the war will go. They can't control it fully, and that's why I don't think that's each of the sides, they really want this war to be until the elections, but they understand in order to win, they need to win, or I don't know if there is a win situation in a war, just everybody lose from that. But anyway, they want to show that they are gaining something from this war. So from this perspective, I believe that both sides, they think the same way, but I don't know. I believe that maybe people will force those politicians after they see the atrocities of this war to end it before thinking about their political gain.
Yeah, and don't forget, 21 months. I mean, that's when Trump would take off. It's an awfully long time to bide your time, given the scale of losses of the Russian military, and to some extent, maybe of the economy as well. Doesn't seem like a smart strategy for Vladimir Putin. If that's where he's headed, I think probably better for him to concentrate and focus his energies elsewhere. And of course, Eli, to say the obvious, we have no idea if Trump is going to be elected. I think chances are much less than 50% that it'll ultimately be him. He has to get through a Republican primary, then win a general election. Again, even if it does happen, 21 months.
Yeah, still a long way to go until there. But someone that is going to be around, and perhaps let me paraphrase, maybe the West should rethink its approach when it comes to concluding the war, in the sense of not how to do it despite Putin, but rather how to do it with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Maxim, maybe Putin is part of the solution and not the problem when it comes to resolving the Ukraine war. Okay, I'll be careful here.
I strongly disagree with that assumption, because imagine yourself finding halfway with, for instance, Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
For instance, under Stalingrad, when they were not sure whether the Soviets would be able to push back, whether anything on the Western Front would be successful yet. And imagine somebody thinking back then, maybe let's find a common ground and make all those moral...
Well, some did, and we saw how that ended, yeah.
Yes, and that's why Ukraine has seen and has been inflicted too much damage, and you have seen the footage that was circulating on telegrams and etc. with these beheadings. So you understand that this is not something that Ukraine will be ready to forget and just to do business with Russia. Russia is out of the equation for us. Because even if we speak not pathetically, but according to the facts, we understand that if Russia is not pushed back, and it still exists, that means that the threat emanating from Russia still exists. This is not eliminated. So what's the point of the war was? So we're just postponing the next round. And at this point, we should understand and remember that Russians do not even conceal that they have their plans for the Baltic states, that they want to subjugate Poland, that they have interests elsewhere, Georgia, the Southern Caucasus, etc. And they see and they want to see NATO basically split. And so Russia is preparing for a very long strategy, and the threat is not gone.
No half pregnancy and no half victory. Maxim Panchenko, thank you very much for joining us from Kyiv. Nicole Yochin, Owen Alterman, thank you very much for your time and insight. We appreciate it. And we're out for a final 2-minute break. But when we get back, we have so much more for you. So do not go anywhere.